Nau mai, haere mai, kia ora, and welcome to We Read Auckland, ko Alison tōku ingoa. My name is Alison, and I'm honoured to be joined in this virtual room by four incredibly talented authors for a conversation about reading, writing, and creating in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. One place, many stories. So look, let's go around the room for some introductions. Firstly, Lil O'Brien, a writer, educator, LGBTQI plus mentor and motorcycle mama, and author of the memoir, Not That I'd Kiss a Girl. Kia ora, Lil.
Kia ora, Ali. How are you doing?
Great. It's lovely to have you here. Next, Ghazaleh Golbaksh, writer, filmmaker and actor, and author of a book of essays called The Girl from Revolution Road. Kia ora, Ghazaleh.
Kia ora, Alison.
Thanks for being here. It's lovely to see you. Now, next, Bobby Hung, a visual artist, educator and writer. He's also known as Burst. He's the author of a recently published book called Burst Draws. Kia ora, Bobby.
Kia ora, Alison. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you again, Bob. Now, Amy McDade, the writer and neonatal intensive care nurse, author of the award-winning novel Fake Baby. Kia ora, Amy.
Kia ora, Alison.
Thanks so much for being here. Well, look, a very warm welcome to you all. Now, this is going to be a serious and a not so serious conversation about making stories in Auckland. But look, I'm going to start with the heavy stuff, if that's okay, so that we can get stuff off our chests first. So my first theme, I guess, is Tāmaki Makaurau. Auckland rolls out the welcome mat. Or does it? So I'd like to come to you first, Ghazaleh. Now look, you arrived in Auckland at the age of 6 with your family from Iran, and this was in the late 1980s. Auckland wasn't a very welcoming place for you at first. Can you tell us a little about this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the main challenge I had was not knowing English. I literally knew 1, 2, and 3 and hello, and I thought I was so cool for knowing that. But obviously, you need to know a bit more than that to get around. I think at the time, particularly because it was the late 80s, I don't think many teachers, primary school teachers, or the ones I encountered, knew how to deal, and I'll put that in quotation marks, with students who didn't know the language. So I had some very unfortunate times with teachers who just got angry or frustrated that I couldn't understand homework. The kids, though, were great. I think the kids had a bit more empathy and they felt for me. But this is what encouraged me to learn how to read and write at a quicker pace. So reading kind of became my savior in many ways. And I even got put up a class, which was hilarious. Even though then in high school, completely fluent in English, I got put into an ESL class, English as a second language class, purely because they just looked at my name on the roll call. And that happened to a few friends of mine. So that's kind of the funny joke that comes out of that. And I think things are changing. I hope they are. But at least for me, what I got out of it was a love for literature and a love for reading and writing, which continues today.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can see the funny side of these terribly challenging times that you had. There was a story that you tell, and it absolutely broke my heart. And it was about when you had to do your family tree at school, and all the other kids in the class had English and Scottish and Irish roots, and you had 100% Persian ancestry. And what broke my heart, I think, was the sense of shame that you felt about that. And yet I felt such frustration at the grown-ups, your teachers in the class, because surely they could have said, hey, this is so interesting. Let's learn about this amazing Persian civilization and look at its maths, its literature, its architecture, its art. what a teachable moment and a lost opportunity.
I think also, many of the teachers probably didn't know themselves. Like, again, another joke. Growing up, people would think when I said I'm from Iran, they'd think it was a misspelling of Iraq. I think we just don't have that relationship with Iran culturally or historically. So I can understand why people didn't really know where it was or what it was. And then it wasn't until I got to high school, actually, and a history teacher of mine told me to focus on that. But that took, a whole decade and a bit to get to that point. And yeah, I was very upset that I wasn't a quarter Irish, a quarter Scottish. And I had this argument with my mother, trying to ask her, I'm like, no, way back, when our ancestors came on the ship, she's like, they didn't come on a damn ship. We flew on Japan Airlines in the late 80s. So that was quite funny. But, and then I did an ancestral test actually recently, and lo and behold, it came up with 100% Persian. My mum was right.
Yeah. Oh dear. Mums are usually right, aren't they? But very, very hard for you growing up. Now, Bobby, I'd like to come to you if I may. You've spoken a bit about feeling like an outsider in your school years, and you moved to Auckland from Hong Kong with your family when you were just 3. How has Auckland treated you?
Yeah, so I mean, thinking back to my years at high school, I've kind of mentioned it for a number of times, and particularly through the Burst Draws book that I published in December. But it was really about this idea of not really fitting in culturally, and obviously kind of growing up in 2 different environments, one being back in Ellerslie and then one being in Epsom, and then going to a grammar school, Auckland Boys Grammar School. There's a lot of kind of masculinity amongst all of the boys, and also not really knowing what I wanted to do while I was at school at that time, and essentially discovering the medium of graffiti, which is partially what this book is about. Really helped me to connect with the visual language, which was predominantly American, and at that time also then being influenced by the hip hop movement and attending events like that. That really also shaped my kind of interest during my teens. So even at that time, actually, I never really was overly into reading or writing or even anything related to the arts. So being able to discover this art form and be able to translate that into my work has been quite nice, and obviously then developed into meeting an entirely different demographic of people.
Yeah, I bet. So it's been a real process for you, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, look, Lil, I'll come to you now. You've spoken at length about feeling like an outsider in the South Island, and you moved to Auckland in your early 20s. What's it been like? How have you travelled in Auckland?
Well, when I moved to Auckland, it was after university. I'd been at Otago University for 3 years, and during that time I came out. And that was a super liberating experience, but a very tough experience. And then, so when I moved to Auckland when I was 20 to go to advertising school, I kind of arrived ready to rampage. So I felt super good. Auckland was like the big city after the South Island, and, Christchurch and Dunedin. And I moved into this world of advertising where, everyone in my advertising class was also very extroverted. And pretty liberal. So it was just a super exciting time actually for me to move to Auckland. I had a very positive experience. I could be who I was. I was like completely out of the closet from the moment I arrived, and for the first time I had a group of friends and my classmates that just really it just wasn't a big deal, but it was also kind of celebrated. And so it was a really exciting time for me. And it was also kind of the beginning of my creative career, I guess, because prior to moving to Auckland for advertising school, I'd never really saw myself as a creative person. There wasn't I was always a big reader, but I'd always kind of written things myself, but there wasn't really a big literary scene down there or events to go to. So Auckland was kind of like a huge opening up of opportunities for me.
I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm glad to hear that Auckland's treated you well. That's great, Lil. Now I'd like to cross to Amy, if I may. Now, Amy, you were born in Auckland, yet you speak of a sense of otherness that's sprang you and your siblings being constantly asked where you were from, and you've been quoted as saying they were asking me where I was from, or asking us where we were from, because we were a bit browner than the other kids in Titirangi, and just wondering how that felt for you.
Well, there's two strands of it, isn't there? Because like all children, you want to fit in, but there's also that desire to stand out as well. And so, yes, we were constantly asked, me and my siblings, oh, where are you from? Because we were the only brown family perhaps in the whole of Titirangi. And we would always answer, well, we're Rarotongan, though we'd never been to Rarotonga, and my mother herself had only visited it once herself. So yeah, it was an interesting question, but we were always very proud. We always very know we're Rarotongan, and we would always claim it. And yet, conversely, as I moved from Titirangi and my parents separated and moved to other parts of West Auckland and went to Glen Eden, and then I ended up at Kelston Girls, I was no longer Rarotongan. I was suddenly Pākehā because I was in a very Pacifica culture, and I felt like I didn't quite connect with the people in Kelston Girls either, because I'd been brought up in a very white environment and I couldn't sing. I didn't feel like I had the same vibrancy or the sense of humor, and so there was that unsettledness as to where I do quite fit. But yeah, it's been a balance, and it's been an interesting path over the course of my life, exploring that part of my heritage.
Thanks for that, Amy. That's really interesting and sad about this aspect of otherness when we are othered, because I think there's a corollary here with otherness, and that's that state of not being other enough. And I suspect, Amy, that's what you're talking about at Kelston Girls, that perhaps you were seen or perceived as not Pacifica enough, and how difficult that must have been.
It was probably more something that I put on myself as opposed to what other people put on me. I just remember the cultural groups performing and just longing to be up there on the stage with them, but having no idea, speaking none of the language. My mother didn't speak the language, and just wanting to jump on the stage with them, but obviously being very far from being able to do that.
Oh no, thanks for that, Amy. And Lil, I think this is a point that I could come back to you, because you tell a story in your book, and it's funny, but it's, there's always that double edge to amusing stories. And you were called out in a gay bar in Dunedin for not being gay enough. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
I mean, I think that was in my third year of university. So I'd kind of was it my third year? Anyway, I was just coming out at the time, and I'd been to this coming out group, and I was starting to explore my identity and feeling kind of good about it, and then I'd realized that to get in, to find some queer mates, I needed to weasel my way into the lesbian soccer team, which I had started doing. And they used to run this monthly queer night called Funk, at this dingy underground uni bar. And as I was walking down the stairs to this one night, I think it was the second time I'd been there, so it was still quite nerve-wracking, because I think for me, like, the first time I stepped into a room full of queer people, it was like being hit by a truck. It just felt so exciting, but confronting. And also just like stepping into a room, for example, of all women is not something that necessarily happens a lot. And so there were just a lot of new experiences at the time. And the bouncer said, "You do know what's going on down here, don't you?" And I kind of like mumbled and kind of clattered down the stairs in my kitten heels, in my skirt and stuff, because I still dressed very, very, very femme at the time, which is what all my straight friends dressed like, and I was still kind of figuring my identity out. And then when I went downstairs and found my new lesbian friends and told them what he'd said, they were like, oh yeah, it's because you look too straight. And then so I was kind of getting it from both sides, from other queer people as well as straight people. And I think it's a fairly common experience where sometimes people who look femme get accused of not looking gay enough, as though there's some way you're supposed to look. But then I imagine that more masculine presenting people also have their own experiences of not looking enough like a woman, or why So I think there's just a general kind of judginess in the world, but definitely in the queer community.
Thanks for that, Lil. Because Ghazale, you talk about in your book you started off talking about that hyphenated identity, and then you morph a little bit to that concept of a symbiotic relationship, about living in two worlds.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting hearing how everyone has their own version of this otherness, of not fitting in or being told that you're not this, constantly being questioned about your own identity, which is ludicrous because it's you, who has a right to tell you who you are. But that does happen, and in my case, it was cultural. So, growing up here, obviously with my name and how I looked, I would constantly be seen as an other, not Kiwi enough. But when I went back to Iran for a visit, I wasn't seen as Iranian enough, because my Farsi, the way I spoke, had an accent, the way I dressed, the way I looked, people could tell that I didn't grow up there. There wasn't, they called me the foreign Iranian. But I think what I realized from writing my book and just growing up in general, I think, was that's okay. You can be, you can celebrate both. You don't have to be one or the other. And I think this happens to a lot of children in the diaspora, because you're constantly questioning where your homeland is, for example, where your culture or your identity lies, and it doesn't have to be one place. And that was something that I discovered through the many years of being on the planet, but also looking at it through my work in the book and also academic research. And I think it's really important to tell the younger generation, or people who are looking for that it's okay to feel different, because 99% of people do in some way or another. And it shouldn't be a bad thing. It should be celebrated, in my case anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice to give to people that are struggling. Thanks for that. And Bobby, I'll come to you now, because I have a theory, and I'm sure many do, that this sense of otherness feeds creativity. And you've spoken about your teenage days, and you'd go and look at the street art along the train routes during this time. And I wonder if I read between the lines with that, whether you went to look at that sort of art because you felt othered, but then it opened up this amazing world to you, and really fed that creative side of you.
Yeah, I mean, I get kind of going back to this idea of graffiti and street art at that time. Obviously, this is during the kind of early 2000s, where the internet is still not really a big thing. There's not actually all that many publications related to graffiti and street art that are accessible to this kind of demographic of people here in New Zealand. There were definitely publications and things happening overseas, but you didn't really get access to that. And also, at that time, the graffiti and street art world was much more underground in many ways. And basically what we had here in Auckland during the early 2000s was a very kind of gangster-oriented type of cultural environment, where I'm sure most of the people growing up in Auckland would probably be familiar with a lot of the tagging and things that they were seeing on the streets. But basically what was present actually was all of the graffiti and street art which was on the train, running along the train lines. And that was a particularly interesting environment for me, because back in the early 2000s, the trains used to not run on Sundays. And so what would usually happen was honestly, a whole community of youth used to be basically walking along the train line and on Sundays, and would basically be our form of a public gallery, art gallery, and to be able to see all of these works being created and created illegally, and it's colorful and it's vibrant, and people are leaving their mark and participating in this culture, and also, yeah, it was just pretty incredible thing to be part of, and you just wanted to obviously know who each of those people were and be part of this community, because this was such an underground thing. You're like, who? There was a kind of mystique to it, I guess, as well, not knowing who these people were, but yet you were seeing the artwork and you're just having all of this work. So being able to see that and then want to be a part of it, that then led me to obviously painting graffiti myself, and then eventually meeting the whole scene and doing what I'm kind of doing now, with not just publishing things to make things accessible for the graph community, but also I'm organizing events and things like that. So often try to network and build the culture.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic, Bobby. Thanks so much. You really paint a wonderful picture of that exciting time. Now, for those of you who grew up in Auckland, just going to ask you, and I'll ask Amy first, when you picture the place of your childhood, what is it that stands out to you?
Titirangi, and it is the bush, it's the trees, it's the birds, the wildlife, and it's a picture that a lot of people who haven't been to Auckland or from outside of Auckland and New Zealand don't realise, in fact, how green parts of Auckland are. Where I was brought up, in Titirangi, it just lies on the border of the Waitakere Ranges, and had a great childhood outside. It was really wonderful. One of my most vivid memories was coming home during Cyclone Bowler and the trees swaying wildly as we rushed inside. But yes, definitely trees. And a view of the Manukau Harbour. We looked over the harbour and it was stunning.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, they call Titirangi the fringe of heaven, don't they? And we can really see why. So, Ghazale, when you picture the place of your childhood in Auckland, what stands out to you?
I remember the first thing I thought of when we moved here that I thought was quite strange was that we had one-story houses, and so much green space. And in Tehran, where I came from, it was, huge apartment blocks, a lot of greys, a lot of beiges. So I was just like, this is weird. These look like the houses in your picture books, And then just thinking about this now, I think the Harbour Bridge for me, because I lived on the shore, and it was, sometimes I'd be going across that on 2 or 3 times a day. And for me, it was just the norm. But now that I'm not living there, it is quite interesting to think about what a symbol it's become, and the additional things that they've added to it. They have the lights now, and just watching the city grow as well. When you're on the shore and you can seeing all these new buildings and the waterfront getting built up, it's quite exciting, actually, I think.
Yeah, we're seeing huge change, aren't we? Thanks for that. And Bobby, I'm going to ask you, but I wonder, I'm going to predict for me for this, but I'm wondering if it's that amazing art along the train tracks for you. But please correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, that's probably more into my teens. But my recollections of Auckland kind of growing up, particularly I think around maybe when I was maybe 8 to 12, I would say, or 14. My experience was actually much more in the inner city of Auckland, the CBD kind of Britomart space, because when my parents first came here, maybe 10 years in or so, or 10 or 12 years in, my mum actually ended up owning or purchasing a hot dog stall, which is on Queen Elizabeth Square, which is the old Britomart kind of space. It's a street or bus station now, but yeah, before it used to be called Queen Elizabeth Square, and basically, yeah, my mum had a hot dog stall there, And I recall working for her basically part-time after school. And eventually that also led to her owning a Dutch food store, which was directly beside that as well. And so pretty much in most of my early kind of childhood, I was working part-time. And also really remember this building, which I think is in terms of its placement now, I think it's where the Countdown is on Quay Street. It used to be called Oriental Markets. And that was when there was like the warehouse and all of these markets and things. So I was always an urban city kid, I think, growing up. And I didn't really experience all that much of what Auckland has to offer in terms of nature and the kind of natural environment. I was definitely more based in the city, but it was more the teenage years where I started to really see the colorful, types of graffiti. But even at that time, I think the inner city was quite grimy. Like there was lots of construction. This is kind of during the 90s. It's definitely transformed now and become, metropolis now, but it used to be pretty grimy from my experience of growing up in the city.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. I remember the QE2 square and the food carts and all of that. The bus station. It was. I think grimy's a really good word to describe it. Now we'll come to you, Lil. As we were saying before, you moved to Auckland when you were very early 20s. What was your first impression of Auckland, if we're looking at visual things?
I remember that actually the first time I came to Auckland, I was 16, 15 or 16, and it was to come up to go on the Spirit of New Zealand, which is that big sailing ship that kids in high schools, I think that's still running, do like a 10-day experience. So we were sailing from Auckland to the Bay of Islands, and my uncle picked me up, and I think the first impression was like going on that motorway from the airport was like there was so many lanes. It was so intimidating that there were this many lanes of the road. Coming from Christchurch, where I think the biggest road was probably like Bailey Ave or something, which had a few lanes on either side. And then when we finished our sail, we actually ended up sleeping on the boat underneath the harbour bridge. So that was a pretty majestic thing to do. And I remember just being blown away by having the city lights there as well as the harbour bridge. That was just massive. We didn't have anything like that in Christchurch. So I think when I think of like early impressions of Auckland, I think back to that. And then when I did move there, I still think of the harbour bridge because I kept getting lost and finding myself driving over the harbour bridge endlessly and being really annoyed.
Yeah, that darn bridge, huh? Yeah. Oh, look, thanks for that, everyone. Now, look, I want to come along to a topic about what Auckland means to you as a writer and a creator. And I'll come to Amy first, because in your book, Fake Baby, Auckland is definitely a character in the story. And what I found is that you write about Auckland with such acute observational skills. Each suburb that you describe in the book, you're sort of so accurate. You write with this pinpoint accuracy and biting wit about the suburbs, particularly Titirangi, Green Bay, and then you write a bit about the central business district. Yeah, I guess I just want to congratulate you on that, because I think Aucklanders will really relate to that sense of place that you have in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It certainly is. I've been told that a few times. The setting is a character in Fake Baby, and I wanted to set it in Auckland because it's the city that I know. It's the city that I love, and it's full of contradictions. And West Auckland is its character in itself, quite different from Central Auckland, and those little contradictions in Titirangi that exist around this group of people that see themselves as quite creative and artistic and all into the environment, but ironically are actually some of the worst recyclers in the city. That's actually actually a fact, and we are slightly right-leaning out this way as well. It's all quite surprising. And then, of course, I built on some stereotypes around central Auckland with Ponsonby active wearing mothers.
Yes, I had to laugh at that, but very accurate in your descriptions. Now, look, I'm going to talk to you. Let's jump to something fun, and I want to ask, where can we start? I might go to Bobby, if I may. I'm going to ask you, what are some great things about writing and creating and working in Auckland?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about Auckland, it may seem like a big kind of community, or a big place geographically, but I definitely feel like with the support of technology and social media and everything, at least within the kind of graffiti and street art world, we're definitely more interconnected than ever. And so for me, one of the real big positives is that technology and social media has really enabled me to be able to connect with all of the different artists and practitioners, that's kind of geographically spread across Auckland and New Zealand. And so for me, one of the main things beyond creating this book is to really be able to converse with all the different artists and practitioners, be able to have conversations with them, obviously get inspiration, which feeds into my own work, but also beyond this kind of book project that I did is I curate a lot of events and things such as graffiti battles, and I'm curating a project in Avondale at the moment, and that's really about activating the community in Avondale through local artists. And so to be able to network with this particular demographic for me is quite an exciting space. It doesn't feel like it's unachievable. Like I said, everybody's super close, and just because the network of artists and graffiti artists and street artists in Auckland is quite tight-knit. And so, it's just great to be able to have these relationships and get inspired from all of the people here.
Oh, fascinating. Thanks, Bobby. Because the internet has really, really brought us together, hasn't it? And I think, especially when we're talking about groups that are othered, I think the internet has been marvellous for working with that and soothing some of those feelings. Ghazale, I wonder if you could tell us some great things about writing, creating, working in Auckland.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things I had when growing up was I had a love-hate relationship with Auckland and New Zealand in general, Aotearoa in general. Just again, it was linked back to the idea of not fitting in, and then over the years, I've come to appreciate it a lot more, and now I love it. I was contemplating moving to Melbourne last year, of all years.
Yeah.
But now I don't think I could. And I think a lot of that's down to the way Auckland is changing. I'm quite excited about it, and I think that is fueling not just my creativity, but my I can be a bit cheesy and say the inspirations. I just feel like the city's kind of becoming a bit more alive. There's so much more to do. There's so much more to see. Again, thinking back to the late 80s, when we moved here, we thought we were living in 1950s Britain or something. Things were all, there was so many things out on a Sunday, and so many other things like that. But now I feel like, again, maybe it's due to technology as well. I feel like we really are like a global city. And we get obviously the negatives that come with that, but also the positives, which is what I'm trying to look at. And in terms of creativity, I'm one of those real basic writers that love sitting in a cafe and writing, and especially when I write my screenplays, I look like such a cliche, but I really enjoy it because who can beat an Auckland cafe?
Yeah, that's right. So I was going to ask you, what are the best places to be creative? Do you have some favourite cafes?
Oh, me. Yeah, I love it's funny that Amy's book talks about Ponsonby mums because I live in Ponsonby, but I'm definitely not a Ponsonby mum. But I love going to the cafes and people watching. There's a specific place on Jervois Road in particular, so it's Herne Bay more so. And sometimes the kind of people that come in, they're just dressed to the nines. They look very glamorous, and I'm sitting there in my jeans with holes in them and sandals, and both of us, both groups belong, and I kind of love that, and I love watching people watching, and I guess that's a real writery thing. And saying that, I think I feel at home on K Road. A lot of eateries on K Road is something that I someplace I enjoy going.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that. Lil, if I may ask you, are there any things that are not so great about writing, creating, working in Auckland?
Why are you asking me this question, Alison? Wow. I think my experience is that I started writing my book when I was in my mid-20s in Auckland. And before that, I kind of always had my personal projects. And I guess I felt quite alone in creating in those times. I didn't really feel like there was a community or a vibe of like ambitious people or like people doing creative stuff. I didn't really have access to that anyway. I'm sure it existed. And then I moved to New York, and that just like it was crazy. Just such a creative place for me, and it's actually where I ended up writing a good 2/3 of my book and finishing my book. And because you were just amongst so much excitement, everyone had their own stuff going on, and they were ruthlessly ambitious, or just had like weird projects. And the city is set up for freelancers, and it's set up for creative people. So you could go to a cafe. They're like, here's 20 PowerPoints. You can sit there for literally 8 hours, and as long as you buy something, a cup of Joe every now and again, it's fine. And so I really spent like a few years working in just like dozens and dozens of cafes and bars around Brooklyn and Manhattan. And it's kind of moving back to New Zealand, it was really hard to match that feeling. And also I was really frustrated by, it's interesting that Ghazali goes to sit in cafes, because I would try and do that, and I still do that sometimes, but there's just I feel like 90% of cafes, you get that vibe where you've been there too long. So I kind of really struggled with that. And it's only now that I've published the book and I'm finding myself being introduced to new worlds that I'm feeling like Auckland is a creative place for me. One place I do like to go in Auckland is I used to drive out to the Piha Cafe and work out there.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Lil. You're really good insights into what it's like here. Amy, do you have some not so great things about writing, creating in Auckland?
Well, I have to admit the big one would be the cost of living here. I mean, being a creative, it's not the most lucrative industry to have chosen. And as a single mum, it is difficult. And I think there are lots of wonderful places to live in New Zealand. And I probably would go elsewhere if I could, but I'm here with my daughter, and family are here, and my daughter's father is here. So I will remain. And I do love the city. But yes, the cost of living as a creative does make it very difficult. I've like Lil. When I was writing in my 20s, I wasn't connected in with a great community of people. I wasn't aware of what was around, and perhaps it didn't feel completely accessible. But I did, through doing the Master of Creative Writing, did make some writing friends, which has made a really big difference to my creative life and my writing life over the last few years, being able to bounce back ideas, and we read to each other and drink wine and have good times. So that's made a big difference to my life here in Auckland.
Oh, thanks, Amy. And when you talk about finding community and connection, it's so important, isn't it? Now, look, I'm going to ask about reading opportunities in Auckland. Lil, I might jump back to you. Do you have a favourite bookshop or favourite library in Auckland?
Yeah, I mean, until the last few years, I went to the Central Library in Auckland nearly every week. I think because I went to advertising school. It was on Queen Street at the time, and so it was handy to me. And it also, you know, had the biggest selection. But I will say that I felt like a bit of a weirdo amongst my friends. Like no one else seemed to go to the library, and I didn't understand that, because you know, libraries are such a magical place where you get people from all walks of life, and it's free to be in there. And I will always have a huge fondness in my heart for libraries. And in terms of bookstores, well, I guess I just I love them all. I do a lot of reading. I read ebooks mostly now, to be honest, because I go through so many. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Thanks, Lil. And hopefully you're making good use of the Auckland Library's ebook collection and e-magazines, etc. Because they're all free. Yeah. Ghazale, do you have a favourite library or favourite bookshop in Auckland?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the last 5 years doing my PhD at the University of Auckland, so I was pretty much in that library quite a bit. And what I love about uni libraries is they do get certain books that you just wouldn't have access to, particularly academic books that can be very expensive, which was great. And in terms of bookshops, I mean, yeah, there's so many. I mean, you can't go wrong with Unity books. Just even the layout and the visuals that they have is fantastic. But I do love secondhand bookshops as well. Again, there's one on Jervois. I live very close to Jervois, so I keep going there. But there's a secondhand bookshop there, and yeah, she often has a lot of the new releases. And for a poor student, it was great because I could afford it. But she also, has some really interesting old books, and I'm one of those nerds that loves getting a classic from like the 1950s and adding it to my collection and looking cool to my friends when they come over.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that bookshop has been in Jervois Road. It's been there forever, hasn't it? It's a great one. Amy, do you visit the secondhand bookstores?
Yes, so I'm very familiar of the one that you guys are talking about on Jervois Road. I used to live just down the road from there, and I visited there again a few months ago, actually, for the first time in a while. I love that little bookshop. And I love all the independent bookshops across Auckland. Time Out Books is fabulous. Women's Bookshop on Ponsonby Road is a great team. And Unity, of course. We've got a great selection here. We're really spoiled.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan too, and they're wonderful destinations. Just go and have a visit and see what you can find. And sometimes if you can treat yourself as well to a book, it's great. So now, Bobby, I think I'll come to you. What would you say are the best opportunities for collaboration in Auckland?
I think probably the best opportunities for me come from being able to have painted projects. Like probably the medium that's probably most common within New Zealand, actually, I think is through street art festivals. And these are usually organised by artists and funded by a number of organisations, including local councils and things like that. So in terms of like making, that's probably where the artists really come together. It's not so much, at least within the graffiti and street art world, it's not so much through publications. It's definitely through exhibitions, public artworks, street art festivals. That's probably where I think most of the interaction happens. And to know that, because most of what we're dealing with is a visual art form, I would also say that within the world of graffiti and street art, that there isn't that many publications, particularly coming from Auckland or New Zealand in general. And so I'm actually working on the moment, kind of in very, very early stages, is to develop a series of books. The first one being a snapshot of 100 graffiti artists, and then the second one being New Zealand graffiti history, and then the third one being a book which centers around graffiti artists and street artists who have then transitioned more into a kind of fine arts context. And so a part of what I'm doing really at the moment is about trying to frame up some vehicles that legitimize what we're doing. purely because there isn't really that many things out there. And through this kind of process, it's, going to further reiterate the opportunities for me to collaborate with some of these artists and kind of learn about their stories, because a lot of their stories are often untold, because they aren't really published, or nobody really gets to hear about them beyond what they might share on the internet. So
that's fascinating, Bobby. Thanks so much for that, and it's really exciting too. So now, talking about stories and stories of Aucklanders, I might come to you, Ghazale. What do you think the best TV is? TV show that's set in Auckland? And if you don't know, I could tell you mine.
I mean, I'm going to be very biased. I'm going to say Shortland Street because I work on that. I mean, there's something you can do about it. Is that your favorite?
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to say Shorty because it's been around for so long. It's still going. Apparently, it's still, I think the second most watched show across the country after the news. So they're doing something right.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's true. And Shortland Street has got that thing, hasn't it, that where art imitates life, because so often there'll be something big that's happening in the community, and Shorty just happens to be running a storyline related to it, and even though they've recorded it weeks and weeks in advance. So I love that about it. And I've got to say my favourite character at the moment is Detective Namal. But we always find we're watching Shorty and they always try and solve crimes on their own, and we'll be saying, call Detective Namal, get her in. So I'm always really pleased when Detective Namal comes, because I know she's going to catch the baddies.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah. And I think I've got a note here. It's the highest rated scripted program in New Zealand since 2000.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's great, isn't it? Lil, I just going to poke fun at myself here with you, because Lil has teased me a little bit about watching Shortland Street on it's kind of terrestrial TV that I watch it on, isn't it, Lil? And I know once you said to me, don't do that. Watch it the modern way.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. I've been bursting to try and get in on this conversation about Shortland Street because I love Shortland Street. I can't believe it hasn't been the highest rated TV show since the 90s, and I used to get the Shortland Street magazine. But now I used to watch it religiously. Like, we would sit down with my flatmates to have dinner, like in Otago. I watched it, I'd yell at the screen all the time. And then when I moved to the States, I stopped watching it, and I couldn't get access to it on TVNZ On Demand, which was devastating. And so I've kind of gotten back into it now, but now I'm only obsessed with the queer female characters. And so I just watch clips of them on YouTube. So that's kind of like, people are like, oh, did you see this on Shortland Street? I'm like, no, I only watch the queer storylines.
Good on you, Lil. Yeah, if it wasn't for Detective Namal, I might have to join you in that. Hey, so what about, who could tell me, talk about festivals in Auckland. Amy, can you think of a great festival that sort of really inspires you?
Well, that would have to be the Auckland Writers' Festival every year. It's just a wonderful group of writers that get together. It has been obviously very international until COVID put an end to that. But I was involved with it last year on an online capacity, and that was pretty cool. And then this year it's running again. I've just got a little reading this year, but I think a few of us that are featuring here today are going to be featuring at the Auckland Writers Festival, and there's going to be some great people zooming in from international and lots of our local writers as well. It's just a great opportunity for writers to get together and meet readers, and readers to stalk writers, which is generally what I've been doing the last 5 years or so of attendance. And so, yeah, highly recommend everyone get along to that. There's also all the wonderful cultural festivals that we have in Auckland that really celebrate the diversity. Diwali Festival and the Lantern Festival. There's just, there always seems to be something on here.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Yeah, that gives us a really good overview. There's lots to do, and certainly to celebrate our diversity too. So, what about Bobby? What's a good place to make art in Auckland?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess if you're thinking about this notion of graffiti and street art, there's very few legal places where you're permitted to do that. One place being the most prominent is probably Corbin's Estate Art Centre. So that's based out in Henderson, and it's a long-standing art centre which has a range of different practices and workshops and events and things that happen there. But also there is kind of like two sets of walls that a lot of graffiti artists come and paint quite frequently. And so there's always a quick kind of turnaround of artwork that is regularly painted where they're permitted to do that. And then there's another space which is located in Avondale, and it used to be the old Three Guys supermarket, which has been demolished for like 15 years now plus, I think. So it's just opposite Avondale Intermediate, and that's also another location. It's a massive empty car park which is owned by the council, and graffiti artists paint that quite frequently, and that's always a really good space because I've held a number of events there and things like that. So that's always a good place to have a public facing space where artists can create their artwork and host events and things. So other than that, there's the odd kind of wall around Auckland in different areas where it's owned privately by landlords, and then individual artists have got permission to paint that. But in terms of like a community based type permission wall, it's really just those two spaces. So I'll be working more in the future with the councils to try and advocate and champion for more legal space. And it's proven, successful in many other cities and places like Melbourne, where they've got the laneways and things, and they've really adopted, those types of spaces for artists to paint and turn them into tourist attractions, essentially. So there's lots of other cities as well throughout New Zealand that are starting to pick up on this trend of, plotting different murals and things around different suburbs and doing street art tours and things like that. So I'm definitely hoping more of that can happen in Auckland.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, it's so exciting, isn't it? Really, really can't wait to see us grow into a city where we have that sort of visual beauty around. Hey, Ghazala, I might come to you because just wondering, if I asked you the question, could you think of a great place to disrupt? How would you answer that?
I was actually thinking about the Basement Theatre down on Grey's Ave. They run a podcast called Disruptor, so that's what made me think of them immediately. But then I realized they actually do quite interesting work, in comparison to, say, the more established companies like ATC. I think Basement is the place where a lot of the practitioners and artists come to specifically to disrupt theatre and other kinds of art forms. And I think it's a really great place with some amazing people who help facilitate it. And their whole, part of their mantra is to bring in new works, new people, new artists, and to kind of challenge the status quo, which I love. And even the venue, when you go there, you sit on the steps and there's people vaping and having a beer, and there's nothing too pretentious or bougie about it. And I kind of love that. It's a little grimy, but in a good way. I I really enjoy going to shows there. And at the moment it's the Comedy Festival, and that's another festival that I think is great, alongside
Oh, yes.
Fringe and the Film Festival. And like Amy was saying, there's so many festivals that are happening that you're never at a loss for a good night out, I think.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, because I'd have to agree with you about the basement theatre too. Now, Lil, I'll come to you. Do you have a favourite book that's set in Auckland?
Do you know what? I feel like Amy's book, Fake Baby, is,
Yeah.
when I was trying to think about this, it was the only one that came to mind. I don't actually remember reading a book, that's set in Auckland and reading Ghazali's book of essays that are set in Auckland a lot. I feel like, and maybe that's just because I had some snobbery around reading New Zealand authors in the past, which I think does exist out there. And it's only really recently, as I've gotten more involved in the community and kind of expanded my reading in the last few years, that I have been reading more New Zealand books. So it's and that's a shame, but I do think it's changing. And I think Amy would say, probably from the reaction she's had to her book being set in Auckland, and certainly like my book being set a lot in at Otago University, people do really love reading about places that they can identify. Hopefully that's just going to keep exploding.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks, Lil. And I think I'd have to agree with you as well. So I certainly love the works by Charlotte Grimshaw too, who and you'll be appearing with her at the Auckland Writers Festival coming up. So, which I'm really looking forward to that. Now, Amy, did you have a favourite book when you were growing up?
I did, yes, and it's called Estrelita, and I was asked this question in another interview. It might have even been with you, Alison. I can't remember, about last year, basically, and I couldn't remember at the time, but then I've given some more thought to it, and there's a book that I've been pulling out of my daughter's bookshelf, and I always hope that that's the one she'll allow me to read that night. She's 6 years old, and it's called Estrelita, and it's quite fitting for our discussion today because it's actually set in Auckland. And so I've got it here. It's lost its original jacket, so it's not quite as appealing, but it's got beautiful illustrations, and it is written by Grant Miller and illustrated by Terry Fitzgibbon. And it's just a beautiful story about a poet who comes to Auckland, and it's set in the Domain, and he is lonely and no one appreciates his writing. And a statue comes down at night and comforts him, and they dance by the moon, and then she has to return every night to her pedestal or he gets turned to stone, but he wants to follow her, and he becomes famous as a poet because he's inspired by her, but all he wants is to be with Estrelita. So in the end, he takes something equivalent to no-dose, I guess, and follows her after she leaves him. She normally kisses him in his eyelids and he falls asleep, but he follows her and climbs the pedestal, and they're frozen in stone together. It's a very beautiful story. I don't know if I recounted it very well, but I love it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Amy, for that. And what a fabulous story. And it's kind of a great way to end the session today. I really want to talk about community, and for all of you, all four of you lovely people here today, despite the challenges you've all faced and the setbacks, the microaggressions, the macro aggressions, you've all given so much to the community of Auckland, particularly, on top of your books, your art and your films. Lil, your work with queer youth, and in fact, queer everybody, a lot of the older folk as well, is so appreciated. Ghazale, all the stuff that you do, but particularly I've thought your documentary series, This Is Us, that you did in conjunction with Radio New Zealand. Amazing stuff. And Amy, the work that you do in your aid work and with the neonatal intensive care patients, I mean, that's just incredible life-saving work. And Bobby, your artistic collaborations and the mentoring of your young crew, just amazing work that you do, and let alone for all of you, you know, your willingness to engage with libraries and talk to and provide inspiration to readers. It's so appreciated. I just want to thank you all so much for being part of today's conversation, and I hope to talk to you all someday really soon. So thank you so much. Goodbye, haere rā, ka kite anō.